Hey, I'd like to give a little disclaimer before you start this video. The sound at different points might get a little funky or even out of sync. So if you find that you're watching this video and the sound is irritating for any reason, please be advised that you can, of course, go to lukestory.com and listen to the audio-only version, which happens to be also available in iTunes. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the Lifestylist Podcast, JP Sears.
Luke, welcome to your own podcast too, brother. I'm happy to have you on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I so appreciate you inviting me on. I'm happy to be here with you today.
For sure. It's actually funny. I wouldn't say I'm like starstruck. I live in Hollywood. There's a lot of stars, but it's funny because I'm so used to I watched your videos so many times and so many of them. It's funny, like talking to you, I'm like waiting for you to make fun of me.
I already am. You're just not bright enough to notice it. No, man. I appreciate you watching my videos. It means a lot to me. And I assure you, I'm significantly less funny and dramatically less charming in person than I am on video.
Well, you know what's fucking great is like every time you put out a video, someone I know sends it to me. And it was actually the first one that I think it was the biohacking secrets one. Someone sent it to me. It was like, dude, do you know this guy? He's totally clowning on you. I was like, and then I actually, for a second, I was like, fuck, is he? Because I literally do like every single thing you did in the video. And I was like, oh no, I guess there's just a lot of us out there and we're open. It's open season. We're easy targets to be made fun of.
That's funny. My lovely lady, Amber, before her and I were together, before we knew each other, I put out a video that's probably a year and a half ago at this point called How to Take a Yoga Photo for Instagram. And she's an Instagram yogi. So she had all these friends just sending her this video. Amber, this video is about you. And it pissed her off. She's like getting all offended. And then jokes on her. Now I'm her boyfriend. It's just your bad karma, babe.
You're like, and look how many views it got.
There's that.
So there was that one. I just want to review a couple of your videos because like I resonated with so many of them. But honestly, like there was one that was about online marketing and being a life coach and like sales funnels and now I'm going to trap you in a sales funnel and that stuff. And I was like, shit. It really made me question my whole business model. I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Like, is it creepy? Is it fucked up? And I've sort of like struggled with that because and you're like a coach and I've done coaching and actually are a real spiritual guy in real life, not just like pretending to be ultra spiritual. So there's been times when I've struggled with like the marketing end of it, even though I know I'm delivering immense value to the people that feel like watching or listening to my show or YouTube videos or whatever. And it's like I know that ultimately I'm doing them a favor if I trap them in a sales funnel. You know what I mean? Because I think what I'm offering has validity, to a certain group of people. But at the same time, it's like I always struggle with like trying to sell anything, especially if it's informational and especially if it has any sort of spiritual bent. And even like when I first learned meditation from my current teacher a couple years ago, you had to pay for it. It's Vedic meditation. It's sort of like TM. And you pay a fee to the teacher. That's how they keep doing their thing. And even as like a customer or consumer of that teaching, it took me like 6 months to sign up because I was like, I shouldn't have to pay for something spiritual. Like God is free.
But how to get to God apparently isn't free. Or it's not easy anyway. But
so anyway,
I like that.
go ahead.
Man, I like just transparency. So I think by the way, I think how one markets, it's just, you got to go by your individual taste. And obviously we know there's slime balls out there who can give everybody a bad rap. But I like just transparency. So what was it, a week or two ago, I put out a promo video. I'm going on a comedy tour. It was just a video like delivering zero value to people, but I'm just promoting the comedy tour. So I called it the zero value video. And I let people know that I'm out to grab their money. And then, the pre-sale of tickets, it's from now until Thursday, like just 2 days. And I said, now you should feel psychologically pressured to buy quicker because there's a time crunch. So I was just calling out the marketing tactics I was using. And that's fun to me. And I've got a membership program for exclusive content, playfulness, purposefulness stuff, so people can live a more meaningful life. So it's like a new program that I'll be doing. I'm partnered with the right people who know how to do the infrastructure of it and market it. And part of how we're going to
that know how to trap people in a sales funnel.
But we're going to be letting them know when we're trapping them. So we'll do a specific parody video on exactly what we're doing to them. So we'll say here's a diagram of where you're at in our funnel right now, and here's where we want you to go, and here's how we're going to try to get you there starting right now. And so, man, and I don't know, like, will that work better, worse, or the same? I don't know. And I'm also grateful I don't care. To me, it's just like, it's the more interesting way to do it. And I always find like what's under the obvious is more interesting. So when we're doing marketing tactics, it's obvious we're doing marketing tactics, but if we just expose the psychology and just the blatant reasons why we're doing it, that's under the obvious. And to me, it's more interesting. It's like what happens behind closed doors is always more interesting than what happens out in the open.
That's hilarious, dude. Yeah, I actually think people really resonate with that too, because not only is it funny, but if you follow like Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, that model of just letting everyone see everything. I remember when he first started, putting out content, and you'd see like his messy ass room. He's like living in his parents' basement or something. You're like, oh, this is the fucking wine expert, But it's like that was the whole appeal, and still is the whole appeal of like that side of marketing. It's like sort of the new advertising model versus like the 1950s TV ad that's totally like brainwashing you against your will with zero transparency and just is totally
and it's
fake.
A big facade. But I think I agree. Part of the brilliance of Gary Vaynerchuk is like he calls out what he's doing. Like when you get access to a lot of his life with his vlogs. But then I remember when his most recent book, Ask Gary V, came out, like in the months leading up to that, how he's doing all these like tweeting at people and responding to comments. He's like, yeah, I'm doing it so that you'll want to, or you'll feel obligated to buy my book when it comes out next month. And it's like, man, and I bought his book. I'm like, that is awesome. It would just be so transparent and like unfear-based. The fear of I'm going to lose sales if you know what I'm doing. It's like, well, maybe you'll lose sales if you act like you're not doing exactly what you're doing. So I think the age of Aquarius, I don't know much about astrology, but I think we're in like an astrological phase, just to add more credibility to my delusional opinion I'm about to say, but an astrological phase of authenticity and transparency. I think people are hungry for that. They like to pay attention to it. They want to connect with it. The deceptive, facading stuff, like, man, I think that had its time and place, and I think it's expired at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I kind of struggled with when I started the podcast, because I recorded 15 episodes, right, with like pretty big people in health and wellness and stuff, and then to put it out, I had to do my own, which is like the first one where you sort of introduce who you are and tell your story. And my story, like my past is fairly checkered. And so I didn't know how real I wanted to be. And it took me like a couple months of debating and sort of struggling with like how much of like a podcast host guy I wanted to be and how much of this is like, I'm just this fucking wacky guy that's into all this trippy shit. I'm getting happier day by day. My life's getting better from the stuff that I'm discovering, the experts that I find. I'm going to put it out. And in the end, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to set the tone of the whole thing and just be totally real. So like right now, I have our Instagram live going, and it's like people see the whole setup, and if I stumble or fuck up or my computer program crashes or whatever, it's so much more fun to like let people into the whole process, And what's funny is every time, like yesterday I did a speaking engagement, and so much of the feedback I got was like, dude, I like your stuff because it's not like staged. It's very spontaneous and real, and the conversations are authentic. They're not like interviews in the formal sense. For sure. So you get that feedback. Was there any stage when you started doing your videos and stuff? Because I know you've been like doing kind of the lifestyle and everything that you're doing for like 15 years, but when you first started doing your videos, did you have to get over like that? I don't know. It's like a deep level of shame where you're like embarrassed to be you and just come out and like. do your thing? How did you start to get over like just giving your gift to the
Man,
world?
yeah, I definitely had that big time. And how I got over it was through it. Like not bypassing it, not out tricking it, but freaking going through it and feeling the fires of my freaking self going through it. Like starting to do a comedy video, like it was like 13 years into my career before I did a comedy video. And some people would say like, yeah, I've never done a comedy video in my whole career. What's the big deal? Well, being a comedian is such a natural part of my personality. It's not my whole personality, but it's a very real, big part of it. So me not letting myself be comedic in the professional front, it's like a big time betrayal of self. And I was betraying myself because I had the shame of, I don't think I'll be accepted. I think I'll be discredited as emotional healing coach, kind of spiritual guy, if I'm being comedic. So in other words, like I was being partly real with my sincere offerings, but at the same time, like, and that's awesome. Man, I so value the service that I gave to people. But at the same time, I also wasn't real because there was more to the whole picture of me that I wasn't presenting. So, man, the creative inspiration, it just got intense. I'd say probably much like a woman who's been pregnant for 9 months. Like, man, the water's broke. There's a force of nature that wants something to be birthed through me. And I can fight it and be in a lot of pain, and it's going to come anyway. Or I can surrender to it. It's not going to be comfortable, but the more I surrender and breathe with it, the more grace there is with the discomfort. So that wasn't like a one-time moment where I surrendered. It's been a gradual process where I become more unapologetic for who I am. It's like, yeah, sometimes I'm going to say some very sincere shit from my heart. And other times I'm going to be very satirical and say ridiculous things. And sometimes within the same sentence. And it's freaking okay. And it's something I've learned is it takes a lot less energy to just be real. And it's so much more freaking enjoyable. So, you and I can show up for this podcast and we're like, I'm going to be JP, you're going to be Luke. It makes it enjoyable. It's not an energy draw. And when I used to do, say, like public speaking, man, it would take it out of me. Like, go show up and speak somewhere. And I realized it wasn't the speaking. It was like the hypervigilance and the constriction of control, modulating who I am, how I am, and being so hypervigilant about what am I about to say, and will that fit into this small little model of what I think I'm supposed to be? Like, wow. Talk about taking away the quality and then the enjoyment from the experience, as well as sapping your energy. And now showing up somewhere, getting on stage, having a conversation, whatever it is, it's like I'm here to be myself. And it's enjoyable. And I think I deliver better value. I think when people can function in the moment spontaneously, which I think you can only do if you're giving yourself permission to be you, there is like three-dimensionality that comes from spontaneity. I think there's like one dimension that comes from premeditation or let me be the host who talks in this tone of voice that real people don't talk to, so nobody can connect with me and I'll feel safe because of that. Like, that's flatlined. But man, there's a beautiful rhythm, three-dimensional rhythm that happens when we take the risk and jump off the cliff into spontaneity. And man, it's so enjoyable. But I think from my delusional point of view, getting on a soapbox here, Luke, really self-righteous right now.
I love it. I'm taking mental notes. I'm like, God, thank God I took my smart drug stash this morning, so I can bullet these things out without taking notes, because there's so much to unpack there. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and I'm going to pitch you on joining Scientology here after this. So, like, I don't.
Are you putting me in a yes ladder right now?
That's where you want to be. Yes. The phase of being artificial, and yes, in my experience, it's way more taxing, way less enjoyable, but that phase of being artificial, I think it's actually a natural phase to go through. I think it's a crappy vat of quicksand to get stuck in, but to grow through it, man, I think that's natural. And I don't think any of us need to hold shame of like, wow, I was kind of not very real back then or last year. It's like, yeah, you have to be who you're not in order to figure out who the hell you are. And I think you have to sometimes be who you're not to learn the consequences of what it feels like to not be yourself.
So that's really good stuff. Like I said, there's so much there. Something that really stuck out to me though is this concept, which actually I now have a visceral experience of. I can totally kind of internalize that experience, which is, I guess you could call it like approval fatigue. You know, you have decision fatigue. Like you wake up and I automate as much stuff as I can in the morning because I don't want to make decisions about what I'm going to wear, how I make my coffee. Like I just automate shit so I can actually use my attention on something meaningful and spontaneous and creative. But you're so right. Like this approval fatigue of how much work it actually takes to be vigilant about making sure that everybody fucking likes you. And it's exhausting. And also it doesn't work because I noticed people that don't need approval and that have a really high self-worth. It's like I just inherently respect them and value them because I intuit that they value themselves and that they don't need my approval. It's like approval seeking is it's such a fucking, it's such a like, oh God, it's so ironic because the more you are seeking that and the more energy you spend on making sure everyone in the room loves you, the less they love and like you because it's actually repulsive to want to be liked. There's an inherent neediness to it,
For sure.
So it's like, it's that thing where like, oh, I want people to respect me. And there's, well, no one will respect you unless you respect yourself. It's kind of like in that same thing.
100%.
The question is like, okay, so if I'm living my life, whether it's the shit I post on Instagram or how I hold myself or how articulate or not I am when I give a public talk or run a podcast or whatever, it's like inherently at the base of that need for approval is shame, right? It's like there's something in me that I don't accept or love. I think I'm a piece of shit because that's what my parents told me or the bullies at school or whatever happened, you know? So how does one, and this is always the question is like, how does one cultivate more self-acceptance, which I think is another way of saying like cultivate more humility where you actually accept how fucking weird you are and your greatness at the same time. Like what's some ways that someone could cultivate that self-acceptance so that you don't have to spend the energy getting the world to say, okay, you're okay. And then it reflects back to me and I go, oh, okay, they said I'm okay. So I'm okay. I got 250 likes on this Instagram post. Oh my God. Okay. I'm like not a dumbass loser. And this is stuff I see within myself all the time. And I'm actually making progress at this, you know, where like I'm giving less fucks about like who I am and just being more authentic. And it does save so much energy, but I don't know exactly how I'm doing it other than just having an awareness of when I'm being fake and wanting people to like me and sort of surrendering it in the moment.
Man, yeah. I think as long as we're worshiping other people's approval, we'll never be ourselves because our self is too dangerous because our self isn't engineered to get people's approval. Though we'll get their approval at times, we'll get their disapproval at times, and they won't notice us at other times. But our self is engineered to express the miracle of our being. Approval, when we're acting out to get approval, that's engineered to get people's approval. So, man, Ram Dass, he once said, probably more than once, that's an awesome fucking saying. Hopefully he said it more than once. You can't get out of a jail you don't know you're in. So I do believe the most powerful step to minimizing how much of an approval addict we are is actually wake the freaking hell up to when we are out to get approval. And like, first off, we have to realize we do it. It's not a matter, do I do it? It's a matter of you do it. Can you recognize even 10% of the time when you do it? And to me, that helps that be a part of our life rather than being our life. And I also think another powerful step that's very easy to say and very challenging to do as far as surrendering, being controlled by this inner insatiable addict of the approval variety, is being willing to actually feel discomfort. You know, you mentioned, and I so agree with you, I think you're brilliant, because I think the same way. I'm so arrogant. Like, I call people brilliant.
Yeah. Well, if we agree, we're both
that's
brilliant.
The thing. That's the basis of my definition of brilliance. Did you agree with me? Oh, it's brilliant. Brilliant, Luke. But your synopsis that the basis of going after approval is inherently deep-seated shame. Like, I'm not enough as I am. I can't accept myself as I am. Welcome to the human condition. We're all born that way. So if that's the seat of going after approval, then my experience is we have to be willing to start feeling that shame and like risk being ourselves a little bit once in a while and feel how scary that is. And like, we'll experience the rapture of our imagination, which is typically way more harsh than the reality actually will be. But we imagine, like, before I released my first comedy video, I imagine nobody's going to want to work with me as a client. People will discredit me. They'll think I'm not a spiritual person. They'll think I'm just a jerk making fun of everything. So that was my imagination. And I imagined it would be terrible for business. I released the video. It turned out to be the best thing I ever did for my business. So, but still, experiencing my imagination was very uncomfortable. And there was shame of self I was needing to connect with. Brene Brown, did you ever read any of her stuff?
No,
she's my favorite author. I've never read any of her books.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but one of her quotes that I have
You've seen a couple quotes on
I've read her quotes. Favorite author of quotes. She does a lot of work on vulnerability, but she has a quote that says, "He or she who's willing to be the most uncomfortable is not only the bravest, but rises the highest." And I think our willingness to experience discomfort helps us rise beyond being an approval addict, because going after approval, when you boil it down, it's just engineered to avoid pain, avoid that deep-seated shame. So, man, sometimes we got to become the warrior in our life and say, I've been orienting myself away from pain my whole life, and that's starting to cost me. I'm an approval addict. What I do and how I am is largely based on what I think is going to get me approval. And that means it's at the expense of actually being myself and learning about who I am. And it's at the expense of inner fulfillment. So can I be the warrior and actually have the courage to feel afraid rather than being afraid to feel my fear? Can I feel the shame there? Can I feel scared? Can I feel like nobody will like me? Can I feel that people don't like me at times because I'm saying real shit? Am I willing to experience that discomfort? And I think sometimes we've got to call ourselves out to be the warrior of our life. Not all the time, but some of the time. And man, and then it's like, we'll seeking approval or disapproval, just like whichever polarity you learn to get your emotional needs met as a child, either one gives us attention. But maybe that'll always be part of our life. Maybe we'll never get rid of it. But the more we add to our life that's not engineered out of just giving ourselves away to get approval, the more quality we have. And to me, the difference is it's like an alcoholic. There's someone like, they can't have any alcohol. It doesn't work for them. They get completely out of control. To me, we're all, to a degree, the approval hog. We're all out of control with approval. So I think the goal here is to become the person with approval who can metaphorically go out and have a glass of wine a couple times a week. Like, I'm going to seek approval. Like this post on Instagram, how many likes did it have? Oh, a few hundred. I'm awesome. And that'll be just like a little glass of wine here and there, but it doesn't dominate my mind. I'm not like Gollum on Lord of the Rings, just always seething and desperately seeking approval 24/7. So to me, that's the goal. Find balance with it, not the fantasy of eliminating the delusional neediness that causes us to seek approval.
Do you think that a lot of your comedy like personally enables you to because you're kind of making, I mean, there's no way you could know about all the stuff you make videos about unless you're doing some of it. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, you know, I'm pretty
about
perfect,
like
but
paleo or functional training or life coaching, like all the stuff you're doing, I'm like, he knows way too much about this shit to be making fun of other people. So in the ability to sort of like not take oneself too seriously, is that not a self-acceptance practice where you're going like, hey, I'm into some goofy shit and I sort of accept and acknowledge myself? Or when you see yourself having a character defect or any of that, I mean, isn't sort of the self-love and self-acceptance inherent to just going, all right, I'm just going to put myself out there and be this goofball? I mean, do you find that is in and of itself almost a spiritual practice?
Luke, my only problem is that I don't have any problems, so I can't possibly portray my shortcomings. So I just pay attention to the unconscious people around me. That's where I get my video material. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. My video material is all based on self-reflection. In fact, me making my videos, I consider it part of my therapy. It's how I become aware of things that are very real that I've been unaware of. So I like to shine the light in my shadows. So yeah, observing my life and, like you said, being able to respect myself enough that I don't take it so seriously, that I'm not so controlled by my shame that I'm unwilling to acknowledge, let alone shine the light on publicly, my dysfunction. Like I can't go there. I have to pretend that. It's like, nope, this is what I do. So I don't have so much shame that restricts me from that, at least the things I've made videos on so far. A couple months ago, I did a video on how to win people's approval. So there's that.
I saw that in your YouTube feed. I got to watch that now. Yeah, I didn't get to that one, but I noticed that. I was like, oh, that's interesting.
And then, I did a video recently on passive-aggressive relationship techniques. Freaking guilty of everything I've portrayed there. I did a video on how to become gluten intolerant and all the anal retentive controlling jerk-like behaviors I portray there. It's because I've done them. I've been gluten-free for 15, 16 years, and I've been a jerk in just pretending it's like, no, I'm gluten intolerant. It's like, no, you're being a jerk, JP. Gluten intolerant means you don't eat gluten. Being a jerk means you act like a jerk. So
abusing waiters around the world, giving them the fucking CIA interrogation about like everything in the kitchen, and yeah.
That's 100% what
I love that. Did you ever watch Portlandia? The show Portlandia?
Yeah, I've gotten into. I've probably watched a dozen episodes or so. It's brilliant.
Oh, okay. It seems like something you would resonate with, but there's one where they go out to eat, and obviously they're in Portland, and he's ordering like the chicken, and he's like, oh, is it free range? Yeah. Well, where's the farm? What was the chicken's name? Like, just the whole thing. And then I forget, it's been a while, but I think they like drive to the farm and like research to see where that chicken came from and whose parents were, and it's like, it just gets fucking ridiculous, unless of course you have some self-awareness around it. It's like if I go to a restaurant and I'm in like a really orthorexic type vibe that day and I'm like uptight about what I'm eating, I mean, I'll even sort of like make fun of myself to the waiter, because I used to be a waiter for a long time in my 20s, and I'll be like, dude, I know I'm that guy right now and I just want to apologize ahead of time, but I really need to know if this is soaking in canola oil or whatever. It's like, and what kind of water filter do you use? So I think it's like with all this stuff, if you have the ability to make fun of yourself, you're able to loosen up. And speaking of like orthorexia, 'cause I can just tell you've been into like health stuff and all this for a long time. Was there a point where you became aware that the control that you were exerting over your health practices and your life was actually more detrimental to your health than just saying, all right, whatever, I'm going to eat some GMO corn or something?
Man, yeah, you read me like a book for sure. What was it? Probably like 19 through probably 28. I was like hardcore orthorexic, like, fundamentalist, dyed in the wool. This is how it is. And yeah, this is all about helping your health. It's like, it's actually a pretty fear-based mentality. And how healthy is that? So yeah, I started to consider, my exact thought was something along the lines of my hyper control, which became, I think, pretty obsessive compulsive. If that's to improve my vitality, let's just say by 5 units nutritionally, because I'm hyper controlling, won't eat anything that's not 100% organic, blessed by Dalai Lama. If that saves me, it gives me 5 units of vitality, and I acknowledge like we're a holistic being. What if that's costing me 8 units of vitality through the psychological stress of coming from that controlling mindset? And I think any method of control really comes from a deeper fear-based mindset. So yeah, I had a little bit of come to Jesus moment, or maybe like come away from Jesus here in this religious metaphor, where I realized like, yeah, man, the best I can say it is health is about balance. And I've been way out of balance. And I think indifferent to health was my only reference point, but I became the opposite extreme of being compulsive with health, like being completely mindless about health, or are you just anal retentive, obsessive compulsive about health? So I define my balance, and I think balance is always like an elusive center of gravity that can move and change. So I think my balance changes, but man, it's nice to sometimes eat something without really hurting myself with shame, or hurting myself with shame to prevent myself from eating something. But man, yeah, it's nice to, like, I think a state of surrender is way more enjoyable than a hypervigilant control state. And I'm curious, what about yourself and your balance or lack thereof?
Yeah, very similar journey. And this is something I'm becoming more aware of because, okay, for example, if I eat gluten, MSG, aspartame, seed oils, soy, corn, wheat, like commodity, post-agriculture crap food that sits in fucking silos in Missouri for a while before I eat it, like all that stuff does have an inflammatory effect on my body, and I try to avoid it. But at the same time, and this, you know, like it takes one to know one kind of thing. At the same time, I've also become acutely aware at how I've used health practices to avoid like facing discomfort or facing pain in my life. So I might wake up in the morning and be stressed out about something in my business partnership or whatever relationship. And I'll sit there and make all my preparations and fucking 45 supplements and this smoothie and this, and everything's timed, and I have a list of when I take stuff. So I actually don't have to do the real work of like prayer and self-reflection. And like you keep coming back to a theme of surrender, self-awareness, walking through discomfort and not running from it. So I've used sort of superficial health practices as a means by which to avoid doing the real shit, which is like facing the real shadow, you know? And so I had an experience the other day, actually, that comes to mind. I was in this workshop, fucking terrifying workshop on intimacy that another guest of mine, John Wineland, hosted. I was like, take any Navy SEAL and put that motherfucker through this workshop. Like, it was horrifying, but really, in the end, gratifying. But one of the things we had to do is there were times where they sent you out, like I was there as a single guy, and so they sent you out like on, not a real date, but a chance to like practice some of the stuff with a woman who was also single there, and there were some couples. But there was one day where they sent a few guys out together, so I had to like pick a group of guys to go to lunch with, and these dudes aren't like biohackers or like, you know, whatever. There's normal guys, I think. And so everyone's like, where do you want to go to lunch? And I don't want to be the controller. Like, it has to be organic, man. I was like, cool, whatever you guys want. I was trying to be just sort of go with the flow. And they're like, how about the deli across the street? And I know this place is like 100% GMO, 100% just totally toxic. And I was like, I saw myself start to get anxiety about it as we're walking over there. And I was like, that's interesting. I bet this anxiety is worse for me than going and eating some goddamn toxic potato salad. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, though, because I surrendered to it. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be the sore thumb here. I'm just going to go along with the flow with the guys. And we went over there and we all walked in. And it's interesting because like the 4 guys I was with all sort of walked in and were like, nah, not vibing it, not resonating. They're like, nah, you guys feeling it? I'm like, definitely not. And then we went to like the farm to table grass-fed rad place down the street that I really wanted to go to. But it's one of those things where it's like, well, what's the what's the lesser of the two damages, like you're saying. So this is something I've worked with a lot, and also just in coaching people too. It's like I did a talk yesterday, and people will ask questions, or they'll want to talk about the health stuff, what to eat, what not to eat, where do you get your spring water, where's the mountain, you know, and all that stuff. And I'm like, let's talk about your fucking parents, you know, or do you believe there's a God? Do you pray? Like, do you have a relationship with something universally powerful and wise that you're connecting to? Or are you just totally on your own in your own little universe trying to not eat gluten? You know, it's like I've had to make myself much more big picture. Yeah. And I think what ends up happening is you nailed the word. You said balance. You know, eventually the pendulum kind of goes a bit the other way, where I used to be like, I would literally wake up and smoke heroin. And that was I'm not even joking. That was my breakfast for years. And then at night I would subsist on like beer and crack. I mean, so coming from that end of the spectrum to becoming, you know, I was a vegetarian for 10 years, almost killed myself with that diet. All the health extremes, every biohacking thing you've ever made fun of times 100, going that way, being like the pill at dinner who's like, oh, I'm not going to eat, you guys. I'm not really feeling it. And everyone, you know, girlfriends are like, dude, you're such a jerk. Like, can't you just fucking go with the flow? We're eating pizza. Like, chill out. So, and then eventually, you know, and I'm sure I'm still not in balance, but that's the goal, like you said, is to not be so controlling, but not totally let go, where I'm just like, cool, I just live on ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, especially as someone who considers themselves like in the health world, a good question to ask ourselves once in a while is, how are my health practices unhealthy on me? And even that we have to be careful of, because then we can ask ourselves that question so much as like, okay, when are my health practices unhealthy on me? I want to make sure they're not unhealthy on me ever, so that I can always stay healthy. And we're like right back to where we started with the illusion of being more balanced. So, and yeah, I think, you know, life is a paradox. The path we take to find ourselves will be the path we lose ourselves on. But yeah, man, once in a while, just checking ourselves before we wreck ourselves is, I think, a pretty decent idea.
You just encapsulated an idea that I want to bring to light, and that is inherently in all of the self-care stuff, there's a risk of self-obsession, right? I think that's what it is. Like when I'm like avoiding my problems and avoiding any sort of emotional feeling by all of these distractions, even like working out, all that stuff that could be like, it's tricky because it could be labeled self-care, so you think it's good for you, but inherent to a lot of that stuff is just self-obsession, where I'm just locked in my own little world and just thinking about me and how I feel and how my body looks.
It can get narcissistic,
Yeah, it gets crazy, whereas like, how about you just like call 5 people and be like, man, how are you? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you in your life? You know, like it's actually so much more healthy to be of service and care about other people and be interested in others and be outward facing than it is practicing 100 self-awareness things. Because you're in self-awareness, there's also self-obsession, right?
I agree. And that's something I would like to say I struggle with, but sometimes like I'm so bad at it, I don't even struggle. It's just like drowning without even trying to get to the surface. So like right now I've got a handful of texts from people who, you know, they're in my personal life, and man, I haven't gotten back to them because I'm so busy in these business projects and so important stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And it's also true, I'm self-absorbed right now. And so the fine act of reaching out and spending a few minutes on the phone with someone to be of service to them, like that is sometimes in my life, that's a lost art. And like, I don't appreciate how beautiful of an experience that is until I go back to it. After I've been away from it for a little while, then I go back to it and be like, yeah, that, like almost in another dimension of self-absorbedness, like that felt really good to be of service to them. Like I didn't get anything in return other than this intangible feeling that feels more meaningful than just like ego gratification that comes with being self-absorbed. So I think it, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. just made me think of another offshoot. Please carry on. Carry on.
I do think it's beneficial for us to be aware of the extremes. Like, the thing I'm doing to help myself, how might that eventually work against me? Or how might it be working against me now? Because, man, there's always at least two sides of a slope to fall off of. Like self-neglect, where we hate ourselves so much we don't even do anything to ourselves. Or narcissism, which is basically we hate ourselves so much that we try to become something that we're not, but it looks way different, like we're self-absorbed versus just dissociated from ourselves.
Yeah, I think also in that, getting out of oneself that's the only way to have true connection with others, whether you're being of service or however you want to contextualize it. I'll be doing all kinds of crazy shit. Like, okay, I'm going to do breath of fire and then Wim Hof breathing and eat this smoothie and have this and have that and then go for a walk and get sun on my upper body and like doing all this crazy shit. And it's like to get ready for it. Like today, I was like, oh my God, this thing's at 11. Like 11 a.m. to me is like 6 a.m. to a normal person. I was like, how am I going to be coherent by 11 a.m.? This is ridiculous. But, you're in a different time zone, whatever. I had to adapt. You're more famous than me. I got to deal with it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do this. I have like an hour to do all these things to get my brain turned on. And it's like, I probably could have just called one friend and just had a heart-to-heart, like loving connection and gotten in a deeper flow state than 20 things I could do isolated on my own in my own little self-obsessed world, And
for sure, gratitude is a biohack. Appreciation is a biohack. Connection is a biohack. It's like sometimes the biohacks that weirdos like you and I get into, whether it's getting into a freezer full of freezing cold water or hooking up electrodes to our head, like that's fancy and that's awesome. But also there is the incredibly free, simple, sustainable biohack of appreciation. Like, man, if that doesn't shift your brain, your mood, and therefore probably your physiology by expressing genuine appreciation for someone over the long duration of 2.5 minutes, it's like, if that doesn't do it, nothing will. And that's like, it's just like so powerful that it's almost invisible. It's like, no, that can't work because there's not a bright, shiny machine. And I didn't pay for it. I didn't pay to learn that biohack. I didn't pay for the equipment. So that probably doesn't do anything. There's no MCT oil in that biohack. Come on now.
There's no $5,000 piece of tech that was associated with it. But what you're talking about is so powerful. I'm looking at the time like, okay, there's one topic we definitely have to cover. But lastly on this is that this is Jedi shit. Is like that the human connection and the sort of feeling that you can evoke, that has such a profound effect on one's relationship to self and also to others, and that's the thing. It's so sort of elusive and takes a lot of practice to be able to value that and make it part of your repertoire as like a biohack in the way that you're contextualizing it, because it's invisible and it's in the spiritual realm, and the spiritual realm to the rational mind is so hard to believe in and so hard to validate because you can't prove it. It's like, so I think we have some pretty good rapport going on this call. Like, I feel your heart. I'm connected to you. I vibe with you. It's like, I couldn't prove that in court, though.
For sure.
If you interrogated me later and be like, okay, do you guys think you had good rapport? Were you vibing? Did he like you? Did you like him? Did you have a good talk? It's like, yeah, I could feel it in my heart. Well, prove it. It's like, you can't prove it. Just like when a puppy runs in the room, you can't, how do you prove that love? It's an intangible hack. It's something
for sure.
It exists in a nonlinear dimension, and therefore it is only verifiable subjectively.
Yeah, I think what gratifies our ego is what we can see, smell, hear, taste, feel, what we can measure. So it's like from a health point of view, like it can be gratifying to our ego. Like we measure my ketones, like I can literally see those moving up, or Wim Hof breathing, like now I can measure, like I can hold my breath for 4 minutes now, gratification. But then, like, man, you can't see, smell, hear, taste, or feel, at least with your normal hand-feeling senses, the gratitude, the connection. So it's like we don't know how to value what's priceless. We know how to value things that aren't very valuable because we can put a price on them. And I think that's what gratifies our ego. So I think it takes a lot of I'm sounding a little cliche, but I think it takes a lot of courage to be in our heart enough that we risk valuing and therefore putting energy and action into, call it the biohacks that don't produce a number and therefore don't really gratify our ego. They gratify our fucking heart, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the thing, is that they're not yeah, that's interesting. So we're talking about the material world, which is what the ego is always associated with, versus the non-material world, the sort of spiritual realm, which is what your soul resonates with. So it's like, when you give someone a meaningful hug, that something happens, but your ego would rather like, get a lot of hits on your website, or roll out of a car lot with a new leased German car or whatever. It's like, it is so true. It's like, which part of yourself are you satisfying and gratifying? It's interesting.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on here, because, I watch your videos and even if I'm like, oh God, I'm busted, like he's totally clowning on so many things that I do, I've never been at risk of being offended by them because I don't take myself too seriously. But something I've noticed is I've been doing this show for a little over a year now. It's not happened too many times, but as you can tell, I'm sort of irreverent. I'm not,
Sure.
I don't really choose my words. I try not to be offensive, but I'm definitely not politically correct either. And there's been a couple times where I've gotten an email where, a woman is like, oh, I really didn't appreciate that you called, one was like, you referred to women as chicks. And I find that really offensive, or things like that. And I'm like, God, I'm actually pretty careful to be conscious, because a lot of the things I talk about on the show are spiritually oriented, and I talk about meditation. So I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm not like that out there like Joe Rogan or something where,
Sure.
I can just say whatever. I'm not a comedian, so I can't get away with it. Otherwise, I probably would say a lot more. But how have you dealt with, and have you had a lot of backlash from people that are like, so emotionally sensitive, and they come out of their safe space for a moment and are exposed to your content and then get their feelings hurt, and how do you deal with like this prison of political correctness that our culture is currently trapped in?
Yeah, I deal with it by going right after it. So to go after that preciousness, where I'm too precious to hear anything that challenges my fragile sense of certainty about who I am and what the world is. So like, fuck that. Like, I don't want to be a slave to avoiding that. Like, I by no means do I want to go out and hurt anybody, but being offended is different than being hurt. To me, it's impossible to be offended or to laugh at something that we don't deep down inside believe is true for us. If you want to make someone laugh, tell them the truth of self. If you want to make someone offended, show them something about themselves that they don't like, that they pretend isn't there. They'll get offended. It's just, those are two emotional reactions. So in my mind, I have that philosophy that it's actually therapeutic for people to get offended. It means they're making a connection with the part of them that they betray, that they pretend isn't there. You're showing them something about themselves that they work long and hard to deny, and they probably believe it's not actually there. So that's why they have this fragile, precious construct about who they are and what they are, and they will react with anger and outrage anytime that is challenged because of how afraid they are. I don't think it's possible to be angry without being twice as afraid. So how I deal with that is have that working philosophy in my mind so that I don't become a slave to avoiding their preciousness. And then just go head on with videos. So a few months ago, I made a video called How to Get Offended. So I exposed the psychology of it. And then maybe a month ago.
Was that the one with Lewis House?
Yeah. He was in that.
Yeah.
And then like a month ago, I released a video on being a millennial and touched on some of the things like, I'm 36 years old, but I don't identify as that age. I identify as a 65-year-old, so I should be able to get Social Security checks now. So it's kind of like by the way, fuck you for not seeing me as a 65-year-old. Why? How dare you think you see what you're looking at? How dare you? And it's like, man, don't try to control how I see things and see the world. And so I like to deal with it by just going head on. It's like if there's a fire-breathing dragon, don't try to avoid it. Go hug it.
Well, see, you're in a fortunate position, I think, because what you do is comedic, and so the content you produce inherently is going to you know, people are going to expect a certain degree of, you know, realness there.
Sure.
And like I've been recently going to see some comedy just because laughing is a biohack. And I get jealous of comedians because they can fucking say whatever they want. Or like I mentioned Joe Rogan, it's like he can say shit on his show that like if he wasn't a comedian, he would be blacklisted by Hollywood and not be able to say, you know, there's this Orwellian thought police thing going on in our culture now that's just like, it is terrifying. And what's crazy about it is that it's like, it really comes from the quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here for the audio people, liberalism. You know, it's like liberal people are the thought police Nazis. It's like everything is this inverse reality where you know, free speech is only good if everyone agrees with what you're saying. Like, if I disagree with you.
And we'll call that free speech. They get the air quotes
and
going
it's just
again.
like, sometimes I feel like, I'm like, you ever had a dream where it's like a nightmare and someone's trying to kill you and you try to scream and no sound comes out? Yeah. And that's how I feel, especially living in Hollywood, because it's so like embroiled in that political correctness and the thought policing, and just like, I'm like, God, I can't say anything without making someone cry. It's like, Jesus. I mean, I think like you choose whether or not you're offended, right? Or you choose whether or not your feelings get hurt. So you could say something about me and my practices or the quality of my podcast or whatever. And it's like, I can either let that in or not, or you can generalize about 46-year-old white males and how we're this or we're that. Like, I don't get offended by anything, I think, because I don't take myself that seriously. You know, it's like, it's the attachment to those positionalities, you know, where it's like this belief system that I have is so fucking rigid. I'm so attached to it that anything you say that doesn't fit within that paradigm pierces my heart. And it's this fragility. It's just like, it's a social phenomenon. And I'm like, when are we going to like break out of this? Because it's like prison, because I'm not a comedian. So I have to constantly watch what I say. And I know you, and I'm sorry, this is a bit of a rant because I'm so like baffled by this, but your comedy could be offensive to so many people. But I think the reason it's probably not is because you have a good heart. You know, it's like, you're a conscious guy. You're a loving guy. I mean, I just get that from you and all of your work. It pokes at people, but it's the intention behind it is not mean. You know what I mean? And so it's like the context of humor, the context of words have so much to do with what they mean and their effect. And so there's this relativism where people make up their own meaning to something and they totally ignore the context or totally ignore the intention behind it. So I don't know. What do you have to say about that? I'm just like, it drives me crazy, you know?
Yeah, you know, I won't pretend that my intention is a strong enough force of the universe to influence how everybody sees my videos. Yet what I will say is, you're right. I do have what I would call pure intent. And, you know, now when I script a video, at the top of the script, the first thing I write down is, what's my intention of this video? And, you know, the beyond like make people laugh, but like, what am I trying to do here? Is it help bring self-awareness of how people are neglectful of their children under the guise of being a conscious parent? So I'll have very deliberate, what I think is good-hearted intent. And I think that does matter. By no means would I ever want to try to get laughs by bullying people. Like you can definitely get what I would call cheap laughs by hurting people, no question. But that's not where I come from in my intent. Is sometimes it interpreted that way? Of course. Someone's going to interpret it that way. Every video, someone will interpret it that way.
JP, I was very offended when you did a video wearing orange glasses because I like to protect my melatonin levels. So I don't appreciate that at all.
Yeah, and I'm a little offended you don't have your precious orange glasses on right now, Luke.
Oh, but I have Iris on my screen. Turning down the blue light.
Know,
have there been any videos?
Your reflection.
Have there been any videos, or have there been any videos that you've produced or you know, written to produce or outlined where you're like, shit, this is actually taking it too far, even though your intention's good, where you're like, I couldn't get away with this, or I'm going to be, you know, blacklisted by my viewers, where it's just like it crossed a line of being too borderline offensive?
There's been Not really, because like when I'm going with a specific video topic and I'm scripting it, there's thoughts that will come to me. It's like, that's a funny thought, but that's too far. That's got a real serrated edge to it. And I think the sort of satire, it needs an edge to help cut through the psychological scar tissue of our old dogmas and our senses of certainty. So we need to cut through that psychological scar tissue, but at the same time, you don't want to cut so deep that you wound people's heart. So I want an edge, but I have to be mindful of like how deep is that edge going. And you know, something you said a few minutes ago, I love how you owned it. Like when you're offended, you make yourself offended. Like you, at some level, you choose that, and none of us would know. Like, oh, I'm going to consciously choose to be offended. It's like, no, but I am generating the feelings of offense. I am doing that to me right now. That's a lot of self-responsibility, and I think one of the reasons that a lot of people in present-day society, and I apologize if you're a person who doesn't identify as a person, like whatever species you identify with, I'm talking to you. You know, because there's a lot of those folks present day who aren't willing to take the self-responsibility of realizing they make themselves offended based on the meaning that they associate with words that are said. And I think one of the reasons why people won't take that self-responsibility, or better said, a lot don't, is they're getting their needs met through victimization. I think especially like as children, if people learn to get their emotional needs met through victimization, just like we can get our emotional needs met through approval, that gets us attention. But being a victim, that'll get us attention too. So some people go that route, and we're creative. We all have this beautiful thing called our imagination. And so our creativity, it has a shadow side. We are so creative. We can create a way to get offended about anything. We're that creative, which means I can victimize myself about anything. You could say anything you want right now, and I'll victimize myself about it. We're that creative. And if that's how we're getting our emotional needs met, that's what we'll be doing. And anything different than that, we're going to fight it, because this is what's familiar to us. We get the illusion of power by being in the polarity of powerlessness as a victim. And don't you dare try to elevate me beyond living as a victim, because this is what I'm self-identified with. These feelings of outrage and victimization, this is what I'm identified with because it's what I learned is going to get me attention. Case in point, people pay attention to big groups of people, especially, and sometimes individuals, when they're acting out as major victims. And then certainly in our individual lives, we can get individual attention when we become victim enough. So the idea of taking self-responsibility and not blaming someone for how you feel is very antagonistic to living small as a victim.
Yeah.
And by the way, when you point out someone's being a victim, then they'll be victimized about that. Like, how dare you call me a victim? How dare you say I'm getting my emotional needs met as a victim? It's like, I think what you're saying is I'm right. Like, I think you're validating what you're fighting right now.
And there's also, I mean, I know for myself, there's like a ego high that's derived from self-righteousness, from like having a position, a belief, a dogma that I'm defending. There's like, it's a false pride kind of thing, you know, where it's like, God, it feels really good. I'm vindicated. You know, I'm like standing up for what I believe in or whatever, but it's that I'm calling someone else wrong, you know? And this is that whole thing. I was talking about it yesterday where it's like, I love the country that I live in. I was born in America. And so I think America is fucking awesome. And especially because of its diversity. And I view America as being so powerful and awesome because all of the most badass people from around the world have migrated here and made it what it is. America's not great because of white males running it. That's actually the part of it that sucks. But like now, if I say, God, I love America, and if I put a flag on top of my house, people will say, oh, I hate other cultures or other countries, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's
like they're not mutually exclusive. You can love something and then love other somethings too. Exactly. Like we can be polyamorous with that kind of love.
Yeah. I love Brazil, but if I put a Brazilian flag on my car, it doesn't mean I hate America, you know?
That means you're a traitor. You're a terrorist.
Exactly.
What's wrong with you, Luke?
So it's like, I think we've become identified with that positionality, and then we get high off being right, the high of being right. And if you turn on the evening news, which obviously I don't do, I always figure if something big enough is happening, like I'll find out. If I see like a mushroom cloud in Santa Monica, I'll be aware of it. When 9/11 happened, someone called me. It was like, dude, now's the time you need to turn on your TV. Okay, gotcha. But that's what you see are these battling egos battling over their position. And then I could even have an awareness of, or we could talk about it, and I could be self-righteously superior to the evening news.
For sure.
Also, so there's deeper levels of awareness, because I'm sure I'm doing that shit on some level too.
Yeah.
But I think in summary, like the beauty of your art and your comedy is that it encourages self-awareness, where there's all of these levels of sort of like, hey man, like, let's not take ourselves and the world and our positions and our practices and everything too seriously. And in that is like the root of peace, because there's some humility there. And humility is like what, for me, is what brings me balance. Like when I can kind of be humble, it's like I appreciate the good in life, the good in me, the good in you, but I'm also aware of the things that are less than good. Yeah. And that's like such a gift to give to the world, man.
Man, I amen to that. Humbleness, humility, doesn't that just sink us deeper into our heart and out of the arrogance of living in this faithful servant called our head?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, listen, man, I could go on and on, but I know we're on a schedule here. I want to ask you, there's a final question, but I want to ask you one thing, just because I always want to ask guests this and I always feel awkward, but I have a feeling you can probably bring it on this question. Do you, in any sense of the word, pray as a means by having a spiritual connection? And if so, what does that look like?
I would say yes, and probably not pray in the religious connotation of it, where I'm on my hands and knees begging to someone in the sky who has a beard. But I would say intentionality of what I want to experience. It's like asking whoever I'm asking, whether it's myself, higher self, or Mother Nature, some other spiritual entity, asking to experience what I want to experience. What was it? Last week, I was part of an ayahuasca ceremony. It was the first time using ayahuasca. Man, I had so much prayer / intention going into that. And my intention was breathe, surrender, and trust. I guarantee I repeated that hundreds of times. And yeah, so I won't pretend that I'm every day praying, yet it's something I do when I'm inspired to do it.
Would you say that in not in the sense of a formal like set aside time where, okay, now I'm going to do this thing I call praying. Yeah. Do you have a practice or make an effort to sort of keep one part of you tethered in that spiritual realm, or having an awareness that there's something bigger than you? Call it universal intelligence, creative intelligence, God, whatever. Like as a living practice rather than a set aside kind of, dedicated.
Man, yeah, as a living practice for sure. And I love that term, a living practice. It's not a theoretical, let me remind myself of the thoughts about what the hell is out there spiritually. But to me, my living practice that regularly helps me feel connected to a source greater than me is my creative time. It's at least 45 minutes every day, usually longer than that. And I feel blessed that I get to earn a living largely off of my creativity. And when I'm in a creative space, I feel connected to something beyond me. It's like I'm living this. I'm not thinking it. I'm feeling a spiritual connection. And if I was theorizing like why, I believe it's because our creativity isn't generated by us. I think it comes through us from a source greater than ourselves. So when I'm in a creative space, it feels like I'm aware of the umbilical cord that connects little me to big something else. And then being mindful of my feelings, my body sensations and my emotions. To me, that is big time spiritual connection. I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, oh, that's the mundane human crap that you should actually bypass to be more spiritual. I don't think so. I think Carl Jung said it wonderfully when he said feelings are the language of our soul. So going into these things that we normally label like super ultra just mundane humanness, like feeling angry, feeling afraid, feeling joyful, I do my best to intentionally be connected with those. And I think that's one of the most direct spiritual connections that I can have.
That's awesome, man. Well said. I resonate with that deeply. In closing, you've taught me a lot today. You've been a great teacher. I think through your work and your videos and your comedy and everything you do, you teach all of us so much on many different levels. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have inspired you that you might point the audience toward?
Sure.
Could be a wonderful book, philosophy
man,
person, anything.
Sure. My greatest mentor teacher, a wonderful man named John McMullen. His organization is called journeysofwisdom.com. At this point, John's 76 years old, and he is the most playful, childlike person I've never met, wickedly intuitive, so compassionate. I've learned so much from him and grown and healed so much through working one-on-one with him that words of gratitude ain't going to happen. They just don't exist. Beyond grateful for John. So journeysofwisdom.com. Then one of the first spiritual books I read, which was deeply impactful on me, was called Conversations with God.
Oh,
Book
yeah,
one,
Neil
by
Donald
Neil
Walsh.
Donald Walsh.
Yeah,
have you read it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that. That was one of the first things in my journey, back in the day. That was profound, yeah.
Yeah, I just, man, I love his work for sure. When I read his that first book, I had this sensation I'm remembering what I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I've always known this. I just haven't known that I've known this. It's like it feels like I'm just reading my own unconscious mind like gold.
That one's interesting because I'm always I'm very open-minded, I would say, maybe too much so, and to the point of being gullible at times with spiritual things. And I've gotten duped by fake gurus in India and all kinds of shit we don't have time to go into. But with like stuff that's channeled, like Abraham Hicks and things like that, I'm always like, like, why does it have to be someone on the other side that's like, I'm always a little bit weary of that. But with Conversations with God, for listeners, the premise of it is, this dude's a regular guy, and all of a sudden he just starts getting messages from God and writing them down, and it becomes this huge book. But I don't know, like you said, everything that he wrote is just, it feels so right on. There's like nothing in there where I'm like, God wouldn't have said that. That's retarded. It's like, it just...
Push your youngest son off the cliff.
Yeah, it actually just...
I want you to.
You're so right, and I haven't read it in a long time, but I did. I had the audio of it, and I'm definitely like, have dove into it. But yeah, you're right. It's like, on some level, I'm like, God, this just feels true, which most of those kind of channeled things, I'm like, a little weary of. All right, so what's the third one?
Yeah, the third one that comes to my mind, a book by Lama Surya Das. It's called Letting Go. Letting Go by Lama Surya Das. That book, I think, it helped me really start to feel like, I guess, embracing of paradoxical thinking. And John McMullen's worked big time on that too. But Lama Surya Das's book, it went into my heart, similar to Conversations with God. And it wasn't just like, oh, I like what this book says and I think it's a good book. It's like, wow, I feel different. I feel impacted by the book.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this already know where to find your work and have seen it based on my relationship with my audience. But tell us about your book, how to be ultra spiritual, your website, social media, wherever you want to point listeners to find more of what you do.
Yeah, the best place to find me is social media. I'm always putting videos out on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm on all the other usual spots too. But all my social media handles are Awaken with JP. And yeah, if you're inspired to grab my book, How to Be Ultra Spiritual, 12 and a half Steps to Spiritual Superiority, you can grab that from Amazon, probably Barnes and Noble as well, or steal it if a friend has it. Like, screw them. But yeah, man, and Luke, it's just been an honor and a pleasure rapping with you, brother.
You too, man. I want to thank you so much. And I can see your Costa Rican background there, and it sounds like there's some kids running around, so I'll let you get back to it. Congratulations on your work and your life, and thank you for joining me on the show today.
Cool, brother. You're incredibly welcome.